Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
I was reading a ghost story to Mrs. Sefton. When I finished, I put the book down and smiled a little. "This is such silly nonsense," I said. Mrs. Sefton looked up from her sewing and nodded slowly. "Yes, it is not a very interesting story. I don't think spirits of dead people come back to scare others. I also don't think they visit places where they used to live. If spirits do appear, it must be for a good reason. You don't really think they appear, do you?" I asked, surprised. "We don't have any proof that they don't," she said calmly. "Mary," I said, shocked, "are you saying you believe people can see ghosts?" "I didn't say that I believe it," she replied. "I've never seen a ghost myself. I don't believe or disbelieve. But strange things happen sometimes, things we can't explain. And honest people, people who don't lie, say so. Maybe they are wrong, but they believe it. I also think not everyone can see ghosts, even if ghosts are real. Only certain people can see them, people with something special, like a spiritual eye. Most of us don't have that. Actually, very few people have it. Maybe you think I'm talking nonsense." "Yes, I do," I said. "I'm really surprised, Mary. I thought you were the last person to believe such things. Something must have happened to make you think this way. Tell me what it was." "Why should I tell you?" "You won't believe me," said Mrs. Sefton. "Maybe I will," I said. "Try me. You might change my mind." "No," said Mrs. Sefton calmly. "People only believe if they see something themselves. If someone sees a ghost, or thinks they do, they believe. If another person knows them well and learns about it, they might agree it's possible. But when a third person hears the story, they don't believe it at all. That's how it is. And my story isn't very exciting anyway. But it's true. You've made me curious." "You must tell me the story," I said. "Okay, first answer this," said Mrs. Sefton. "Imagine two people who love each other very much. If they are far away from each other, do you think their souls can still talk to each other in a way we don't understand? And if something bad happened to one of them, don't you think they would let the other one know?" "That's too hard for me, Mary," I said, shaking my head. "I don't know much about things like that. But I don't believe in those ideas. I think they're all silly." "I'm sure you think so too, sometimes." "Maybe it is all silly," said Mrs. Sefton slowly. "But if you had lived with Miriam Gordon for a year, you might believe it too. Not because she talked about it. She never talked about things like that. But there was something strange about her. When I first met Miriam, I felt like she wasn't fully real, like she was just a spirit. That feeling went away after a while, but she always seemed different from other people. She was Mr. Sefton's niece. Her father died when she was a little girl. When she turned 20, her mother got married again and went to Europe with her new husband. Miriam came to live with us while they were away. When they came back, she was supposed to get married. I had never seen Miriam before. Her coming was a surprise, and I was not home when she arrived. I came back in the evening, and the first time I saw her, she was standing under the big light in the living room. For a moment, I thought I was looking at a ghost. Miriam was very beautiful. I had heard she was pretty, but I didn't expect her to be so lovely. She was tall and moved very gracefully. Her hair was dark, but her skin was very light and clear. She had her hair pulled back from her face, and her forehead was high and white. Her eyebrows were perfectly shaped, dark and straight. Her face was oval, and her eyes were very big and dark. I soon noticed that Miriam was somehow different from other people. I think everyone felt the same way when they met her, but it was hard to explain why she felt different. To me, it seemed like she didn't fully belong to this world, like part of her soul, was somewhere else. But don't think that Miriam was hard to live with. She wasn't. In fact, it was the opposite. Everyone liked her. She was one of the sweetest and kindest girls I have ever known. I grew to love her very much. As for what Dick called her odd little habits, we got used to them. Miriam was engaged to a young man from Harvard named Sidney Claxton. I knew she loved him very much. One day, she showed me his photo. I thought he looked nice and told her so. Then, as a joke, I teased her about their love letters. Miriam gave me a strange smile and said quickly, "Sidney and I don't write letters to each other." "What?" "Miriam," I said, surprised. "Are you saying you don't hear from him at all?" "No, I didn't say that. I hear from him every day, every hour. We don't need to write letters. There are better ways for two souls who understand each other perfectly to talk." "Miriam, you strange girl, what do you mean?" I asked. But Miriam just smiled again in her odd way and didn't say anything else. She never explained her ideas or beliefs. She also had a habit of sitting quietly and looking like she was far away, thinking deeply. It didn't matter where she was. This could happen at any time. She might be in the middle of a lively group of people, but suddenly she would sit still, staring into space, as if she couldn't see or hear anything around her. I remember one day very well. We were sewing in my room. I looked up and saw that Miriam had stopped working. Her hands were on her lap, and she was leaning forward, her lips slightly open. Her eyes had a strange, faraway look. "Don't look like that, Miriam," I said, feeling a little uneasy. "You look like you're staring at something 1,000 miles away." Miriam came back from her thoughts and laughed softly. "Maybe I was," she said. Then she looked down for a moment. After a little while, she looked at me again, frowning slightly as if upset. "I wish you hadn't spoken to me just now," she said. "You interrupted the message I was getting. Now I won't get it at all." "Miriam," I begged her, "please, my dear, don't talk like that. People will think you are strange. Who was sending you a message, as you call it?" "Sidney," Miriam said simply. "That's nonsense," I replied. "You think it is nonsense because you don't understand it," Miriam said calmly. I remember another time when a guest came to visit, and we started talking about ghosts and spirits. We all said some silly things, no doubt. Miriam didn't say a word then, but later, when we were alone, I asked her what she thought. "I think you were all just talking to pass the time," she said with a small smile. "But, Miriam, do you really believe that ghosts—" "I hate that word," she interrupted. "Okay then. Do you believe spirits can come back after death or appear to people?" "I'll tell you what I know," she said. "If anything happened to Sidney, if he died or was hurt, He would come to me himself and tell me. One day, Miriam came to lunch looking pale and worried. After Dick left, I asked her what was wrong. "Something has happened to Sydney," she said. "He has had an accident. I don't know what it is, but it's painful." "How do you know?" I asked, surprised. Then I added quickly, "You haven't received another strange message, have you? Surely you don't really believe in that." "I know," she said firmly. "It's not about belief or disbelief." "Yes, I've had a message. I know Sydney has had an accident. It is painful and upsetting, but not very dangerous. I don't know the details. Sydney will write to me about it. He only writes when it's absolutely necessary. So your special way of communicating isn't perfect yet?" I joked. But seeing how worried she was, I said kindly, "Don't worry, Miriam. You could be wrong." 2 days later, she got a letter from Sydney, the first one I had ever seen her receive. He said he had fallen off his horse and broken his left arm. It had happened the same morning Miriam got her message. Miriam had been living with us for about 8 months when one day she rushed into my room. She was very pale. "Sydney is very sick, dangerously sick." "What should I do?" she asked. I knew she must have received another one of those strange messages, or thought she had. After the incident with the broken arm, I couldn't doubt her as much as before. I tried to comfort her, but it didn't work. 2 hours later, she got a telegram from Sydney's friend. It said Sydney was very sick with typhoid fever. I was worried about Miriam in the days that followed. She was sad and anxious all the time. One thing that upset her was that she wasn't receiving any more messages. She said it was because Sydney was too sick to send them. So, like everyone else, she had to wait for news through letters. Sydney's mother, who went to take care of him, wrote to Miriam every day. Finally, we got good news. The worst was over, and the doctor said Sydney would recover. Miriam became cheerful again and quickly felt better. For a week, we got positive updates. One evening, Miriam and I went to the opera to hear a famous singer. After we came home, we sat in her room, talking about the performance. Suddenly, Miriam sat up straight and shivered. At the same time, I felt something strange, a horrible feeling, as if someone else was in the room with us. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. Miriam was staring ahead. Then she stood up and held out her hands. "Sydney," she said. Then Miriam fell to the floor and fainted. I screamed for Dick, rang the bell, and ran to help her. In a few minutes, everyone in the house was awake, and Dick quickly went to get the doctor. We couldn't wake Miriam up. She looked as if she were dead. We tried to help her for hours. Sometimes she would wake up for a moment, but she would only look at us with empty eyes. Then, she would faint again with a shiver. The doctor said she must have had a terrible shock. But I didn't tell him what I thought. At sunrise, Miriam finally woke up. When everyone else left, and it was just the two of us, she turned to me. "Sydney is dead," she said softly. I saw him just before I fainted. I looked up, and he was standing between you and me. He came to say goodbye. What could I say? While we were still talking, a telegram arrived. It said Sydney was dead. He had died at the same time Miriam saw him. Mrs. Sefton stopped talking as the lunch bell rang. "What do you think about it?" she asked as we stood up. "Honestly, I don't know what to think," I said truthfully.